Welcome back to the channel. Some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I hosted a podcast called SCIFI on Screen. The podcast lasted about 5+ years, and I gently closed it down in order to transition into a YouTube channel talking more about books and movies. But I reviewed films one at a time, sometimes compared originals to remakes, sometimes I did special shows. But a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques and analysis that I did for these films, I stand by. And so I thought, since I've done over about 100 shows, that I would share the archives with my new audience here on my YouTube channel. The shows range from about 45 minutes or so more of a podcast. I'll just put up a static image of the old logo, and you can listen and enjoy. So I'm going to do these weekly, and hope you enjoy.
Welcome to another edition of Sci-Fi on Screen. I'm your host, Jeff Palermo, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the Tom Cruise science fiction epic Edge of Tomorrow, which was released in the summer of 2014. A little background about this film. This particular intellectual property was what the Japanese call a light novel. It was written by a guy named Hiroshi Sakurazaka. It was released in Japan in December of 2004. They call light novels that are between maybe 40 and 50,000 words long, which I think is a little bit more than we think of as a novella, and definitely a little bit less than your average novel these days, which tend to be longer than they used to be. From this novel, this light novel, I need to read like the Wikipedia. I'll paraphrase a little bit the Wikipedia entry, just to give you an example of how things get written in big Hollywood movies. And this is a Tom Cruise movie, so it's a big deal. So from the light novel, it was originally wrote on spec by a guy named Dante Harper. So basically on spec, meaning he wrote it for free in his spare time. Took about 8 months and wrote it. No one paid him for it. Spec, basically you write something on your own because you think it's going to be worth something, and then you try to sell it. If you're an established writer, you're actually paid to write a script, and whether it's any good or not doesn't matter. You still get your money. Then it was reworked by some guy named Joby Harold. From there, Roberto Orci and I think it's Robert Kurtzman did a draft. These are the Transformers, Star Trek reboot guys. They're like, the $1 billion team. Then 6 months before filming started, Doug Liman, who's the director, and I'll get to more about his background, discarded 2/3 of the Dante Harper original script. These two guys, Jez Butterworth and John Henry Butterworth, I guess brothers, were hired to rewrite the script. Then screenwriter Simon Kinberg took over from them. And then 8 weeks before start of filming, Christopher McQuarrie took a crack at it. So McQuarrie came on board because he worked with Cruise in Jack Reacher, which came out a couple of years before. And supposedly McQuarrie kind of got it and put the final polish on it in terms of seeing what he thought Cruise wanted. Just the main principles. Tom Cruise, obviously. Emily Blunt is in this film. It was directed by Doug Liman, who directed the film Swingers way back in the day, and the first Bourne movie, The Bourne Identity, and also directed the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie film, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So Lyman had a pretty decent track record before this film. So let's get right to it. The film opens cross-cutting between the credits and what looks like kind of a documentary style setup. And we're getting these newscasts which show the arrival of the aliens seemingly in a single large comet. It crashes. And then through, basically interviews and other footage, and we see some animatics. We see that they're slow spread throughout Europe. So Europe is basically being overrun by these aliens. And we hear a throwaway line in one of the newscasts saying, they seem always to be able to anticipate our actions. And obviously that's going to play a big part in the plot. So there's a little bit of a teaser. It's a great opening because we don't see any aliens or any ships or anything. It's very realistic. And as I've said in previous podcasts, when you ground your speculative or fantastic idea in something as gritty, as real as you can get it, you're starting off with on a solid footing. It's very solid. I mean, this could be the opening film of simply a Tom Cruise thriller about terrorism. It's that much they show nothing. It doesn't play any of its cards when it's open. So it's really solid opening. And part of this opening, we hear about this Battle of Verdun, and this is basically obviously hearkening back to the famous Battle of Verdun in World War One, and that we hear that this is the first, human victory over the aliens, who are called the Mimics. And there's this the hero of that battle. It's called the Angel of Verdun, and we'll come to meet her in a little bit. And we see her plastered all over posters. And we're also introduced to the technology that was introduced into that Verdun battle called New Jacket technology. And basically, for sci-fi fans, these are military exoskeletons. So where a soldier kind of gets in harness, sort of battle armor, and there are large weapons that are all moved by motors, and making the soldier sort of like half robot, half soldier. And so we see that called New Jacket technology is kind of like a new thing. So throughout the introduction, we see Tom Cruise playing sort of a military PR guy, and he's in a lot of the interviews and a lot of the newscasts, sort of selling the war, as it were. The movie opens proper where we see Cruise on a helicopter heading into London, and his character's name is Major William Cage. He goes to see this General Brigham, played by Brendan Gleeson. We get a sense from some exposition that Cage was in advertising back in the States, but since the war has changed the entire world, and that his advertising firm tanked, and so he wound up going into the Army and became an Army PR guy. For whatever reason, General Brigham wants to use Cage to kind of sell this invasion. And basically, they're on the eve of some huge Normandy-like invasion, and it is going to be, on the shores of France. A lot of similarities with World War II at this point. Basically, Brigham says, look, you're going to be on that beach tomorrow with these soldiers and a camera crew. I want you on there. Cage is correctly just, completely declines and says, look, I'm not a soldier, and he's completely saying, thanks, but no thanks. And then Brigham, pulls rank, and he says, look, I spoke to your CO already. You've been drafted, and you're going to be on that beach tomorrow with a camera. Cruise stands up, and he tries to play a card, and he tells Brigham that, look, it would be really bad if this offensive didn't go well, and you were kind of blamed, and the finger was put on you. And he basically tries to blackmail Brigham. And then he kind of gets desperate when Brigham doesn't budge, and he's desperate to do anything to get out. And at some point, Brigham you think that Cruise has blackmailed him, and he walks out of the office, and he's arrested and tased, and he goes down. I want to say a little something about Tom Cruise, because I don't think he's the greatest actor ever lived, but when you watch a Tom Cruise movie, the guy, he's convicted. He's like that rock singer, or like many rock singers who don't have natural gifts, but they throw their entire soul up into their voice, and it doesn't matter. And I feel like that's Cruise a lot in films. I appreciate it, because when I go to a Tom Cruise film, I rarely, if ever, feel like he's mailing it in. I feel like he cares about what's going on up there, and he's convicted in what he does. He doesn't have the greatest range, but he does what he does best. He's a movie star, and when he's on screen and he's doing what he does, he is always full of conviction, and I really appreciate that. So just wanted to give Tom a little shout out, because, he's not doing so well, so he could probably use my support. Now Cage wakes up at this Army base called Heathrow Base, and it's basically an ad hoc Army base set up at Heathrow Airport. And he finds out that he's been busted down to recruit, stripped of his rank. He's given boots and by a master sergeant who comes up to him. And then his full-on master sergeant arrives, and it's Bill Paxton. Paxton plays a Master Sergeant Farrell. And I have to say, I'm not a Bill Paxton fan. I think he's a really goofy, bizarre actor. I rarely liked him in anything. I liked him inversely in Aliens, We're screwed, man. Game over, dude. This whole shtick. But I rarely like him in films. But he is perfectly cast in this as the, sort of elder master sergeant. He's got this laconic little southern drawl. Nothing too showy, but just enough. There's a brief conflict between the two of them where Cage is basically like, look at me. I don't belong here. I just want to make a phone call. Please, you got to help me out. I got to call my CO. He pulls a piece of paper out of his pocket and basically says, we got the word on you, buddy. You're a deserter. So Brigham did him dirty. I mean, not only did he just bust him down a recruit, he kind of forged his papers in saying that Cage is a deserter. And he's not a straight-up deserter. It's kind of a complicated thing. He was kind of, unfairly drafted in a weird way. So They march Cage off to to meet his platoon, and we get this first large scale shot of the Heathrow base, and it's very cool. It's sort of these military. We see these military drop ships, which are kind of based off of the V-22 Osprey vehicle that I think the Marines have now, where it's tilt rotors, sort of get it up in the air vertically, and then shift, and it becomes an aircraft. Very nice shot, very cool. Looks very realistic. And we see a lot of temporary army, barracks erected in Heathrow Airport. He's brought into his squad, which is called J Squad, and he's in handcuffs at this point. Farrell basically tells J Squad that Cage is a deserter, and Farrell has all these great little, he does the drill instructor thing pretty good. He's got all these little sayings like, you will be born in the baptism of fire, and courage is born on the battlefield, and you will be born again, and all this great stuff. And they're good lines, and he's got this kind of quasi smirk on his face. But you get the sense that they're going to frag this guy, and that being a deserter, that they're setting him up to just basically get killed as soon as he hits the beach. We're with Cage at this point. We're looks like he's going to buy it very quickly. So the next morning they suit up for this huge offensive, and they put Cage in one of these New Jacket exoskeletons. They look good. I mean, they look very heavy and tough. They don't look like paper mache set pieces. They look like these are really metal pieces, and I think they were. From a little bit that I read about the film, I think that most of the cast wore really heavy. They're very heavy armor. We're definitely in Cameron's Aliens territory here, with the Marine grunts doing their shtick. One of the guys is naked under all of his armor, and you see his butt. He walks around, and they're giving him shit about it. And it's good, I mean, if this is the kind of stuff that Macquarie brought to the script, I mean, it's necessary, because it strikes that rare action, serious / comedy balance, where it's serious enough film that what's going to happen to Cage is going to be for the marbles, right? And you're going to have to put him through his paces, so you as an audience member are fearful for his safety. And at the same time, you get some good wisecracks, because life is difficult and humor is necessary. I think it's impressive that that balance is found here very quickly, and it's maintained for most of the film, I would say. One little piece of information is that they won't tell Cage where the safety is on his armor. So at this point, unless he figures it out, he's going to be dropped into the war zone with, inoperable weapons. And the rest of the J Squad don't give a shit. Being a deserter, they're happy to let him die. So then we get kind of a big scale shot of all of the, the military personnel getting ready for the invasion. It's a big shot, lots of men in armor, lots of drop ships. Looks great. Lyman does a great job. Then we're inside the drop ship, and, there's that sort of drop ship scene, right, where they're all joking back and forth with each other, and there's this joke about look what's inside that armor, or what, a dead man, and basically they're all laughing, and Cage is just panicked because he's basically near death. So they prepare to drop, and before they can actually do it, the dropship is hit by enemy fire, and a big chunk of it gets ripped away. Pretty cool shot, too. Pretty good, very up-to-the-minute 2014 special effects, very visceral, very right in your face, surprising, like a car accident, as it were. So finally, they'll wind up dropping, and there's a great shot as they're dropping, where they're dropping on these cables. The dropship is still in the air, but it's wildly off course, and it's not being controlled, and so they're all spinning around on these cables, and you hear the sound of that cable sound when a cable is whacked by something. It's really cool, good Foley work. It's a nice realistic scene. It takes a while for Cage to get to the beach, and he finally does drop. So basically, Cage's battle here is fairly short. The combat looks really good, though. It does not look very CGI-ish. Lyman shoots it really well. It looks very realistic. All the things looks very substantial. The ships look substantial. All the men on the beach look substantial. Very, kind of Saving Private Ryan for sure. And we finally see a mimic, and the mimics are these weird, kind of octopus-like creatures. They're many tentacled, and they can burrow underground and come up from anywhere, and they roll and scooch across the ground really fast. They kind of reminded me in a way of the squids of the Matrix trilogy. They're really cool. I mean, they definitely do a great job, and because designing aliens these days. Who's any good at it? And when do we, see aliens that are really interesting looking? And they're usually variations of bugs of some kind. So, they're not the most interestingly designed aliens, but they're done well. You get it. You really feel that they are there and not that they're super CGI, which is surprising. Then we see the Angel of Verdun. The character's name is Rita Vertansky, played by Ellen Blunt. Cage sees her fighting one of the mimics, and she's killed right in front of him, which is, I think, a really nice anticlimax. Like, as a movie viewer, like, oh, there's the co-star of the film. And in the film, she's this big, great hero. In the opening sequence of the main, act one of the film, she's killed, which I like it. It was a nice kind of turn. The humans are getting slaughtered out there. The mimics are just way too powerful and badass, frankly. So, whoever's left in J Squad, they regroup in a crater. They're about to advance out of the crater when a mimic pops up right in the midst of them and just starts killing them all. Things get really gritty here. There's lots of dirt flying around from the mimic, tunneling upwards and going crazy. And it looks really cool. I mean, it's fast and it's cut, in a modern, fast way, but it works for some weird reason. I wasn't thrown out or I didn't feel like it was Blizzard of cuts. Like, something about it kind of works. During this sequence, Cage finally gets the safety off of his weapon and winds up killing the mimic, and he just starts laughing because the whole, his whole short little life here is just so absurd, and he kind of gets it. Then we see another mimic. It's different. It's kind of larger and blue. It's different from the other ones that we've seen. And it basically sees Cage, and he has seconds. And he grabs a Claymore mine, which some early back at the base when they were suiting up with armor, some of the soldiers strapped these Claymores to their chest. And if they were incapacitated on the beach, they would wait for a mimic to come up to them and then trigger the Claymore, killing the mimic, of course, and themselves. So Cage remembers that. He grabs the Claymore, holds it to his chest, and when this mimic comes at him, he detonates it, blows the mimic away, which dies kind of right on top of him. But Cage is dead too, and we see his face is like all desiccated. And then the blood from this mimic kind of just flows into his face, and his eyes kind of go black. And then the film cuts. We're back to him waking up on Heathrow Base, which is where the scene starts, after he gets sort of drafted. We're basically in the first replay, and he's living the scene that we've already seen, but with knowledge of the day that passed. So he's retained, this knowledge. Basically, if you see the film Groundhog Day, the premise is very similar. So he's got this prior knowledge, and he's remembered a couple of things from the first time through, and when Master Sergeant Farrell's going into one of his sayings, Cage kind of mimics him, and Farrell looks at him, strangely. He's again taking a J Squad. What they do, which is what Groundhog Day does, is there are certain sort of touch points that are done as part of every day. Like the one touch point of Farrell talking to him. There's a touch point of the poker game. There's a poker game that when he's first introduced to J Squad the first time, they're playing poker, and Farrell sees a card tucked in underneath a piece of the blanket. So he opens it up and he catches them and he makes them eat the cards. So there's a bunch of things like this, which is good because it's really great for the viewer because it grounds you. You're like, oh yeah, that scene. Oh yeah, this little moment. And so you don't have a shapeless scene each time. There are these nicely crafted sort of what I call hard points that every time you see them, it's easy to remember what happened last time. So kudos to the writing up until now. It's because it's really fantastic, deceptively so, I should say. Goes through the whole day, and we cut much quicker, obviously, through that. We're back to the drop zone. We're back to the explosion in the drop vehicle. Back to him on the beach. The last touch point on the beach was the guy who's in the big, the guy who's in the armor naked. When Cage hits the beach, he gets killed by an exploding dropship, just kind of stomps on him. And this time, Cage yells at him, tries to warn him, and he's not in time, and he gets killed. He fights through the same way, and then he saves Vertansky, who died the first time, actually saves her from getting killed, but he takes a fatal wound. And her response is by taking his extra battery, knowing that he's going to die. And again, it's a nice turn from what you would think you would expect of this, quote, hero. That she's just, she's trying to stay alive like everybody else. So it's pretty good. He dies again, and he wakes up again in the same place. This time, he tries to explain to Farrell what's going on. He's like, look, you're not going to believe me, but, I've lived this day twice before, and so on and so forth. And he tries to impress him with all this knowledge that he has. When he gets to J Squad, he knows everyone's name, and he knows what cards they've held in the card game, and he knows that one of the guys fights naked. And, he has all this prior knowledge that there's no real way to explain except to go along with his explanation. But in another funny moment, right, and we cut to the dropship, and Cage has tape over his mouth. They duct taped his mouth so he would shut up. So he drops again, hits the beach again, and this time he actually saves the big guy from getting killed by the aircraft, but he's killed. And then we're back again to another day, and we see him back on the beach, and he saves the big guy and survives. And then he's heading towards Vertansky to save her. He's hit by a truck, which is funny, you know. There's a nice balance here. It's struck between his incredible predicament and then this wild humor. I laughed when he got hit by that truck because I know that when he wakes up the next day, he's going to know where the truck is and he's going to make it. The film picks up at this point. Like, what's great about the direction here, probably even more than the writing, is that once the film has shown you how this works, then they can kind of, how they do it is then, when Cruise makes a mistake or when Cruise dies, they just pick it up when he makes his next attempt and succeeds where he dies the last time. So the film really moves fast. Like, it's very entertaining in that way. You pick right up where, you were. And so you're seeing how he's learning his way onto this beach and into this battle. It's terrific. So this time he finds Vertansky and she's about to be killed, but he saves her. And he saves her by killing mimics in a way where he's done this before. So, there may be even more times that we've seen that he's tried to save her. And he tells her that, we're fucked. They know we're coming. I've lived this day before. And strangely enough, Vertansky says, when you wake up, come find me. This is the first of sort of this new moment of like someone else knows what's going on with him. The next day, he resets, and this time he runs to J Squad. He hides the poker game before the sergeant gets there. And then we see a scene we hadn't seen previously, him running what they call PT, I guess physical training, on the base. As he's running, there's some point where he is able to squirrel away from them by rolling into the path of an oncoming truck. And his goal is to roll through it and then kind of, run next to it and escape. And the first time he tries it, he gets squashed, and Farrell walks over. He's like, now why in the hell did he try to do that? So it resets. Next time he gets through it. So he, escapes for the moment from his squad, and he goes to this area where, it's like a firing range where guys in new, men and women in new jackets and practice killing sort of metal versions of mimics. It's a way to kind of get acclimated to how to fight in these things. This is where we meet, Emily Blunt for real, Sergeant Rita Vertansky, and she's alone in the middle of the floor with her hand, like doing this this balancing motion on her hands. So he goes up to her, and she's completely asshole-ish to him, and like, what do you want? What are you looking at, soldier? That she's supposed to be really tough. He tells her about what just happened, and she basically, gives him a little exposition. Don't tell a soul what's happened. They'll throw you in the loony bin, and she's about to take him to see someone else who knows about what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit here, pause for a second, talk about Emily Blunt, and talk about, women in action movies. I don't really like Emily Blunt in this film. I don't know much about her. I mean, I looked over her filmography. She's been in a lot of things in the past decade and a half. She's just very stone-faced in this. And there's tough guy, girl action heroes, right? And it's easy to play that for the stone-faced, Eastwood-esque type of character. The ones who do it the best are the ones where something else is going on behind the eyes. Like, Eastwood was the stone-faced tough guy, but there's something about his eyes. Something else was happening in there. Like, there was I wouldn't say a vulnerability, but there was something in there that was at odds with his, intense exterior. He wasn't a stone killer. I think, in Trinity in The Matrix is the same way. Like, she's very tough, very capable, but there's something vulnerable about her. There's something about her as a filmed actress that contrasts with that, and she doesn't play on it. It's just there. And it makes, I think, tough guy characters need, man or a woman, they need a little bit of vulnerability behind the facade in order to make them fully rounded. And examples of the other side are in the Underworld films, Kate Beckinsale. She's just one note. There's not a moment in that film where I think, this actress gives a shit about this role or that this part is anything interesting. And I feel the same way about Blunt here. This character, Rita Vertansky, is supposed to be this big hero, and she's just trying to play it tough and blank. And it's a one-note kind of performance, and it doesn't impact the movie per se. Like, it's a very entertaining movie, and she plays that part fine, but it's not interesting to me at all. And even later on, when there's a quasi-love, interest between them, I don't buy it. But what I want to talk about in terms of women in film, women in action films, is that especially for this film, like there she is, this, and let's face it, right? She's this hero of Verdun, right? And we've met J Squad, and they're all fucked up. They got scars, tattoos, they're grimy, they got all kinds of piercings. Like they look like a squad of people who have been in battles. They're all fucked up. And Vertaski's got long hair, okay, and she's beautifully made up. Her face is pristine. And first of all, if you're going into combat, give a shit, men or women, your hair is short. There's no way you're getting it, you're going to be running in an army helmet with long hair or in any way, And plus, on women, long hair is very feminine, And so they want directors or probably producers, right? They want hot women in action films, and they want them to be tough and kick ass, but they still have to look like runway models, And I feel like, yeah, Blunt did some working out, so like she looks like she's got some shoulder muscles. She's not Summer Glau, right, in the Chronicles of Sarah Connor or whatever, like these wafy models who are supposed to kick ass, or Uma Thurman, like these unbelievable women who look like they would fall down a flight of steps if they weren't, helped up. And they're supposed to be these kick-ass action heroes. And I just find it absurd that they wouldn't cast, or like Linda Hamilton in second Terminator film was like the closest thing. She was tough looking. Her body was tough. There was something about her that was like, she didn't have to do the feminine beauty thing. It wasn't like going into battle. Let me get some eyeliner going here. I know this is Hollywood, right? I know it's a Hollywood film, but guys look like tough military guys, and women look like hot models in like nice looking armor that's shaped around their breasts. Like there's all this crap. So part of the problem with her character is the actress herself. The other part is really, for me, what I'm seeing clashing on the screen is they want to show a tough female soldier, but Hollywood can't let go of the fact that she still has to be glamorous. It bothers me. I mean, it doesn't really bother me that it takes me out of the movie too much, but it introduces just enough of a sense of unreality where I'm sort of like, okay, where I might be taken into the movie more if they had done it in a way where she really is a war hero. Like, and when you see them fighting against the mimics, to be a war hero in this kind of conflict, man, you have been through some shit. You're lucky to have all of your limbs intact. And Emily Blunt looks like she stepped off of a magazine cover. So anyway, end rant, but just kind of wanted to say my piece on that. So now we're introduced to this Dr. Carter, this other character, and now we get the big exposition about the mimics. There's this, they're in front of this computer screen, and so we're getting this visual, animatics of what the mimics look like, and a demonstration that they're a hive mind. Again, it's an old sci-fi trope. There's nothing new here. It says a central brain that's running them, and there's like 80-90% of them are these drones, the main mimic soldiers. And then there are larger drones. There's like one in every, there's one in every, I guess, army or collective force. And the sort of larger blue ones called alphas. What we're taught is that the Omega that controls everything has the power to control time. What happens is the alphas, the blue aliens, are the trigger points. So every time a blue alien is killed in battle, the Omega actually resets the day, and it learns about the human tactics of that day. So the humans have been getting killed because every time they kill an alpha, the day resets. The mimics sort of know exactly what's going to happen. They could, every battle is fought this way. So like the humans have no chance. We also find out that this whole, victory of Verdun, which was sort of the first, the humans are striking back, and Rita Vertasky is the hero of Verdun. The aliens allowed the humans to win because they wanted to lure war-winning human force into battle so they can annihilate them and kind of be done. What we find out is blood from these alphas when they're killed, and Rita had done this in the Battle of Verdun. When they kill an alpha, but the blood flows into their blood, the power to reset the day is passed from the alphas into the human, who now has the alpha blood in them. So Vertasky happened at Verdun because she had this ability for a while, and then she lost it. And we find out that she lost it because she got hurt. I don't know if we find out this now or later, but whenever too much blood or the loss of blood or new blood is put into a human being who has this power, it sort of crowds out the Omega or the alpha blood, and they can no longer have the power to reset. What she tells Cage is like, in order to retain this power, he has to die every day. And it's a little sketchy because first they're telling us he needs new blood, And perhaps, underneath it all is that if the body makes new blood every day, maybe that's part of the deal. But so basically, the rules of the movie are that he has to die every day to retain the power. So he tells him, "You're crazy. Let's just go to the general." And Rita says, "I've done that before, and they put me in a psych ward, and I was dissected." And so we get more exposition when the Omega began to search for Rita. The Omega realized that the power to reset the day was now in human control. That she began to have visions of the Omega and where it was located. And so she's telling Cage that, once the Omega starts looking for you, you're going to start to have visions. And in those visions, if we're smart, we can figure out where the hell the thing is and get to it and kill it. Cage is a little skeptical, and he's like, "Have you ever actually seen it?" And Rita said, "No, I got the visions, but I never actually saw it." Cage says, "You want me to, get you off the beach to kill this thing? I'm not even trained for combat." And then we cut to, now we're into the second act where he's going to have to be trained. So that's our setup. And so far, the film so far has been terrific. I mean, the premise it's a crazy premise that's broken down so clearly and done and shot so well. It's amazing that they pulled it off, I have to say. I'm really impressed. And, and they lay out the way it works in such a wonderful, entertaining way that's both gruesome and difficult and funny at the same time, which is pretty amazing. I think most of the casting is really good. The grunts are great, all different, types and races. And Cruise is himself, as he always is. Brendan Gleeson is great. I don't think Blunt is very good in this, but I've said my bit on that. So now we begin, the training sequence. He is terrible. And basically Rita is the true star here, and she's like a perfect killing machine because she's gone through this before, and she's used this power to train herself up to be, nearly unbeatable. So now we start this training, and a lot of times Cage gets maimed, irreversibly while he's training, and she has to kill him to reset the day. It happens over and over again, and he's basically like, "Look, how long it's going to take me to learn all this? Have you tried to transfer the power via sex?" And she's like, "I tried it. How many times?" And she shoots him. So, what they make funny is her killing him over and over again in different ways. Like, and he's at one point, he's like, "I think I broke my back. I can only feel my lips." She kills him. And he gets hit by another one drone, and he's in the back. He's like, no, I'm okay, I think I'm okay. And she kills him again. So it's all these ways where he's trying to lie to her, to tell her that, he's not hurt as bad as she thinks. But, of course, they have no time for him to be hurt at all. So every time he gets hurt, she kills him to reset the day. And it's very funny. And in this sequence, they start this theme, which I really like, which is the underlying theme of this movie, and very, very purposely put here, and I love it. But the theme of failure as a tool to learn, and the amount of times that Cage fails, the amount of times he failed initially on the beach just to survive, to get to Vertasky, and now the amount of times he's failing as he's training with her, and over again, it's great. So it's setting up this theme. And at one point, at one of the resets, he finally gets a vision of the Omega, and we see in different types of film stock, the Omega is in some dam somewhere. It's holed up, and he sees some German writing. And so now their goal is like they got to get off the beach and get past the battle and find some transportation to head out towards that dam. So there's this whole sort of montage-ish sequence where they start learning the battlefield, and you have to go 15 steps left, duck, and then shoot and go here, and you see them almost like a football playbook. They're diagramming out the battlefield and dying over and over and over again and trying to figure out how to get past this beach. Because the battle is so incredibly chaotic. It's imaginably difficult, and again, you see them failing over and over and over and over again. The theme is part of the film. They don't just do like the him dying and resetting, and then all of a sudden he's a perfect soldier. Like they stay with the theme of everything being extremely difficult, and the amount of times that the characters have to die to learn it. And this doesn't let up, which I think is one of the film's strengths. One reset day, Cage decides that he doesn't want to go to the beach. He escapes from the base, and he goes by motorcycle to London, take the day off, and he's standing on the London Bridge during when the battle has been going on, and all of a sudden you see, coming up the Thames, thousands of mimics coming through the water. So we come to understand that, if the battle is lost, London gets completely overwhelmed. It's a really cool shot, and of course he dies again. Cage finally, he takes it up a level now. There's kind of a desperation that they have got to get off that beach, and So now, he and Rita are like these twin whirlwinds of death on the battlefield, and they're just like unstoppable. During one of them, he actually saves J Squad that's taking refuge in that crater. And of course, in the very first day, Cruz was this wet recruit who knew nothing. And at one point, he kind of storms around and he kills all the mimics to saves them. And they're all looking at him like, who is this guy? He was a major stripped to rank, and he's like this amazing warrior now. It's funny. It's a good moment. So in this sequence, they kind of punch through and they get off the beach and they go to this trailer park. They grab a car with a thing attached to the back, and there's a mimic in the sort of the trailer attached to the back, and there's a brief battle when they kill the mimic, and the trailer gets blown up, and now they're driving inland, like they've made it off the beach. And at this point, now like when they got to the trailer park and they fought this mimic, I was really intensely into it because I thought, holy shit, if they die here, they finally got off the damn beach and they made it. And this one stupid mimic, this one dumb mimic kills them, they got to do it all over again. And I was really intensely into it, very invested. And it made me think very much like it was like playing a video game with really shitty save points. To those video game, players out there, where you play a certain game where it doesn't save for long stretches of time. So like, if you have to go through a long period of the game and if you're going to die, you're going to reset, it sucks, but the tension in the game is unbelievable. So I want to segue briefly and talk about video games because, one thing that I came away with in this film is that this is probably, when we say, oh, movies are like video games, they're all this, and the special effects and the shooting and everything, they're like video games. Like, yeah, kind of, in one way. This film was written and directed and structured the way you actually play video games. And I had never seen that done on screen before. Like this is the first film that really gets into the roots of what it means to play video games. And if you've played games, like it was a 3 or 4 year period when I played pretty heavily, and I don't play anymore. But, when I first started playing games, I was so petrified of dying. I was so afraid to die as a character. And every time I died, I'd freak out and get angry. And then as I learned and played more games, it's like dying is the way you learn. When you get killed, and it's exactly the way it's depicted in the film. When you're playing kind of sci-fi action games, it's like, you have to die your way through the landscape sometimes. If it's a really hard game, you don't know about the alien that's hiding behind the rock, 3/4 of the way across the field until you actually encounter it for the first time. And if it kills your ass, now you know it's there. And now the next time when you approach it, you're ready for it and you kill it. And this film really got at that spirit, which I thought was great. And I mean, it's very impressive how well this theme works. Like it's really built into the bones of the film. For the first 3/4 anyway, or maybe 5/6 or something like that. But anyway, I want to point that out, that it's terrific in that way, and I'm really impressed by the fact that it got it so well. So now we're with Vertasky and Cage, and they're driving in this car. And now the film gets a little more conventional in this sequence because now we're like these two characters are in the quiet of there's nothing to learn, there's no aliens, and they're just sitting there getting to know each other. For me, I really didn't find any chemistry between the two leads at all. Vertasky is just this stone-faced, soldier. She's just been at war too long, and she's too hardcore and ardent. She doesn't talk, and it's not very interesting to me. They try to give her some backstory. Cage has been, even in this car, that he's been in the sequence a bunch of times. So now they use the trope of the movie, which I think is clever. They use the trope of the movie to make their relationship interesting because she doesn't know how much he really knows. And she never really knows if the day they're living that he's lived it before and how much, she has said in previous times. And again, it's a very simple trope that drives so much of this movie, but they use it in so many different ways, and I think it's really neat. However, it's pretty lame, and supposedly, she's watched this soldier named Hendricks die 300 times when she was resetting her days, and I didn't care. I really didn't feel like she really gave a shit, I just felt like it was a really lame way to try to give her some gravitas. So they run out of gas and they head on out through the countryside, and little by little their suits both lose power, so they have to abandon the new jacket armor. Shot really well, beautiful countryside, like some really nice shots here. It's funny for me, I think it's a smart move that they abandon the armor because in the mundane shots of like the abandoned farmhouse and out in the countryside, the armor looks kind of goofy. Like, in a sense, the armor works well in the battle, in the barracks. It makes sense when they're wearing armor in those scenes. But for them to be trooping through the countryside in armor, it kind of looks goofy. And I wonder if they did it the first time and Lyman saw the rushes and he was like, it looks goofy. You know what? Let's have them strip their armor out. Who knows? Just something I was thinking about. So they take refuge in this empty house. They try to do some chemistry and character between the two of them, which to me doesn't work. They discover a helicopter, and Rita can fly it. And we also reveal that she's been wounded, and Cage bandages her up, supposedly creating chemistry, which it does not. She realizes that he's stalling for whatever reason. And so what the cool reveal is that, they've been in this situation dozens of times before. Like, they've made it off the beach dozens of times. And what he tells her is, at this point, he can't figure out a way to save her, like, no matter what happens. And he's tried, like, everything. The minute the helicopter starts up, she dies. And it's almost like this point in a video game that you're playing where you can't do it a certain way, and you've done it every way you think you can, and it's completely beaten you, and you either have to go, get a playthrough on YouTube or completely rechange your tactics or do something else. And it's at this point, Cage is like, no matter what I do, you die. You don't make it past this point. Here's the crux: is that if she dies and he continues on and kills the Omega, the day doesn't reset and she stays dead. So he's trying to convince her to, like, just, go to another house and just kind of huddle there and let me take care of the Omega. And she's not, basically not going for it. And it's the movie wants us to believe that he's falling in love with her, which is why, he's gone through all these elaborate ways to try to save her. And I think the whole romantic angle here between the two of them is forced. It doesn't work. They don't need it. They can be buddies, and they feel more like buddies, actually, in the film. They don't feel like lovers. They don't need to be lovers, but it's a Hollywood film. So, again, it's part of, the big budget movie tropes that doesn't work. And, it's another piece of this movie where, like, it takes you out of the movie a little bit. And it also makes no sense that she would be so stubborn that, she knows what it's like to reset, and that he tells her, look, there's no point in you dying, so let me take the helicopter and I'll survive. I'll kill the Omega and I'll come back for you. And, like, she refuses to budge, even though she's going to die. And I don't know. It was just an odd thing. And so she gets in the helicopter, starts it up. The mimic comes out of the ground, kills her. And she says something like, my middle name is Rose. And that's never used in the rest of the film, so nobody cares. And in the background, we see a bunch more mimics, and of course, Cage dies. So he resets again, and this time he doesn't engage Rita. He doesn't go find her, since he knows where the Omega is. So, but at this point, like, and now a change has come over Cruz, and I gotta hand it to him. Like, in the first bit of the movie, civilian PR guy, and he's halfway joking around, or he's scared, and he's always under threat. Vrataski's always better than him, and he's always kind of on the learning side and the underdog, and he's always either scared or under some kind of duress. And at this point, knowing that he can't save Rita, and that if they don't meet, that he's not going to be able to, like, be with her, that he becomes just like, his face sets up differently, and he's really badass at this point. So he's suiting up now, and they're back to the first day. But oh my God, he's been through so much, and nobody fucks with him. Like, he's eye staring everybody. And at one point, when their J Squad's finally suiting up, the guy looks at him and he's like, I need an extra battery and as many grenades as you can give me. He totally just he drives through the battle like a badass you wouldn't believe. He gets past, drives the car, the helicopter. He gets to the dam. And, of course, now he can get to the dam in his suit because he's got an extra battery, which is just, nice movie logic, very smart. And so he gets to the dam. He's got all these extra grenades. But when he leans over the deep well where the Omega's supposed to be, it's not there. And he realizes that it's a trap, that the Omega knows that he's got its power and that there's an Alpha there and another drone waiting for him. So he's cornered, and they wound him, and they basically, they want to wait it out until he either passes out or bleeds out so the Alpha can get its power back. He tries to kill himself with a gun. The Alpha knocks the gun away from his hand, but at some point he's able to drown himself. He does something where he drowns himself, and he does die, and he resets again. So now we're back with Rita and Carter again. And he's gone and met Rita and Carter, like in one of the resets, and he tells them that the visions are a lure, it's a trap, and the Omega is not there. They don't know how to find it, and they don't know what to do next. They're kind of like everything's been revealed as sort of a game that was rigged from the start. Up to this point in the film, I mean, this has been a crackerjack story. A very unorthodox idea has been laid out in incredibly solid and easily digestible fashion, and each shot in the film has been inextricably linked to the story. Like, there hasn't been a piece of fat on this film up until this point. This is when things start to kind of let go a little bit. What we hear next is that this Carter guy used to be like a expert in the mimics and mimic biology. He used to be a civilian back in London, and he's developing this piece of hardware that if it comes in contact with an alpha's blood, it sort of like would light up the sort of pathways that connect all the alphas and the Omega, and they could figure out where the Omega was. The one that he has on base doesn't work, it's broken, but the prototype that he believes does work is in the general's office back in London. You get this moment of like, well, how the hell are you going to get an alpha to plug into? And then Cruz realizes that he has alpha blood in him, so they don't need an alpha, they have him. Now we're on our sort of heading towards the third act type of thing. Again, they use the main idea of this story to get in and get the general to sort of open the safe where this thing is. And so, them getting into the general's office is very much, they must have done it like 100 times because, they know all the beats to wait before people come out of bathrooms. And it's clever, right? It's like, again, it's like another video game. It's like they had to learn it. And so they finally use, Cage's power to reset. They get all the way in to his office. And even in his office, there are all these moments where he's like, the phone rings and he knows who's on the other end. The general secretary comes in and he's like, I know what she's going to say. And so he dazzles Brigham with all this foreknowledge. And he's like, in this safe in your office right now is a device which will allow me to locate this Omega and kill it. But up until now, I haven't been able to convince you. And of course, this time, for whatever reason, Brigham walks over, opens it up, and hands them this device. But we realize the general is very cagey, as he was last time. And when the doors open, they're confronted by all these soldiers. So again, it takes a few more resets for them to figure out how to get out of the building. And they finally wind up in a parking garage and sitting in the passenger seat of a car. Cage jams the device into his leg, and there's some sequence where he realizes that the Omega is underneath the Louvre, which has been flooded. In a really cool twist, once they have this information, a soldier in London in one of the armored jackets smashes their car. Both Cage and Vertansky are knocked out. And so Cage wakes up in an infirmary, and immediately he looks up and he realizes that, they've put a couple of pints of plasma in his system. He's screwed, and he's lost the power to reset. Now it's a nice setup. I mean, a really good setup is that, they've got to kill the Omega before the invasion. They got 3 hours to get to Paris, kill the Omega, and of course, at this point, they can't reset to get there. So from London, they've got to get to Paris, and they're, fugitives, basically. So there's this great line when Cage is like, we're going to need more soldiers, and Vertansky says, who the hell's crazy enough to follow us to Paris? And we know right away that J Squad is the only, is the only chance that they have. They get back to base, and basically, Cage uses all the information that he's gleaned about J Squad from all of the resets. I mean, there must be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resets. He knows everything about these people, these secrets that none of them even know about each other. And it makes sense in the story. Like, again, they're using what Cage's power is and that's his tool to get through certain problems in certain situations, which is cool. What's great in this moment is they're unconvinced, even with all that. They're still, not completely convinced until Vertansky comes up and joins them. Because in a way, again, this is the first day, and they're like, this raw deserter is spinning us this whole tale about the war. And, there's no way they can kind of buy it. And the movie's good because it puts Vertansky, who is the greatest warrior of them all, there with him to back up his story. And at that point, they're in. Now, this is where the film sort of, to me, where the really crackerjack, interesting, well-acted, well-shot film ends. And the by-the-numbers, action film we've seen 1,000 times begins. Because, Cage can't use his power anymore. So we're not resetting the day, and we've seen the mimics in action, lots and lots of times, so they're not novel. We've seen the soldiers in action, they're not novel. The one catch, as they're flying at night towards Paris, they realize is they can't kill an alpha because the aliens have the ability to reset the day now again. There's this nice moment where, they tell, and the sucky thing about it is, I guess it's not completely sucky, but they tell one of the soldiers says, well, what if we come up against one of these things? And Vertansky says, you take one for the team and you let it kill you, which is kind of cool. They don't use it at all except right at the end. And I feel like it could have been, that itself would have been a great way to generate a little more drama, which is sorely needed here. So at this point, like all the soldiers are gung-ho. They're explaining, about the aliens' power to reset the day, which nobody knows. Like, in a way, they've come over too far to Cage. Doesn't quite ring true. So it's the only thing that didn't kind of make sense to me at that point. So at some point, they get into the area of the Louvre, and the dropship is like decimated by fire. Cage is separated from the rest of them, and he falls in the water and nearly drowns. His armor takes him all the way down, so he has to climb out of it to get to the surface, which he does. And they kind of regroup, and there are these shots of now them in deserted nighttime Paris, which are really cool, actually. Lyman does some really great work here. But still, it just feels like, your basic action sequence. And so the idea they come up with is that there's like a couple of football fields between them and the Louvre Pyramid, which is where they need to get to. And it's, they'll never make it because of the amount of mimics. So the notion is that they'll try to restart the dropship because it's not completely, it just can't fly. And they'll use it to kind of, along the ground, just sort of motor towards the Louvre and just get through the mimics as fast as possible. So two of the soldiers sort of take on a bunch of the mimics away from the dropship and sacrifice themselves so the dropship can get moving, which is cool. And then there's this whole battle where, the dropship is going and the mimics are behind it. And there's one guy and a huge gun inside the dropship, and he's killing mimics. And there's this big battle at night, and it's okay. The entire squad is lost in the process, and now it's just Vertansky and Cage, and they're being stalked by an alpha. So there's one point where they realize that one of them has to distract the alpha and the other one has to go for the omega. And then there's this sort of, before the end moment where Vertansky goes to Cage and she's like, it was great knowing you. You're a good man, Cage. And there's a kiss. Again, there's no sexual chemistry between these two. And it just seems very perfunctory that, Tom Cruise has to have a love interest in this film because whatever, they have to have a love interest. But it doesn't matter to the film at all. And it actually doesn't feel quite right. It makes this very rote last act seem even more cliched. So, they're both... There's lots of movement and action in the dark, and none of it's very interesting. You can't see very well. And we see Rita getting killed by the Alpha, and now the Alpha's after Cage. Cage dives into the flooded basement, and he's swimming towards the Omega. He's wounded mortally by the Alpha, but he drops the grenades, and they sink, and the Omega swallows them. The thing explodes. The Omega dies, but Cruise sort of falls into the Omega, and as it's dying, we see all the Omega's blood kind of flow into him. And again, he takes his power back, which doesn't make any sense. Because if the Omega was the thing that had the power to reset the day, the Omega is dead. And so even though he has the Omega's blood, I guess you could say that the blood of the Omega is the thing that has the power to reset time. I think right in that moment and in a couple of lines to come, they're setting it up for a sequel because it's possible now that Cage has this, again, he's got this Omega in his blood. And I could see them setting up a sequel where he can't lose the power and they have to sort of capitalize on it. But the very careful constructed lines that we hear in the newscast is that, the aliens have lost the will to bring the fight or have lost the will to fight. We don't hear that all the aliens have died, that the alien threat is ended. There's no clear line to end all this. And I just, of course, they want to leave as many options open as possible for a sequel city. What's happened is the day has been reset. And again, it doesn't make any sense because after he gets the blood by the Alpha, the next shot of him is in the helicopter, which was when he was on his way to the generals in the first film. And when he lands in London, the battle's already over. There was no battle, like in some weird way. Somehow, the human forces have figured out that, all of the enemy is kind of dropping down. And it's very vague and it's very kind of cliched. And I don't know. It didn't matter. At that point, the third act was just what it was. I was just like, whatever, you're setting me up for a sequel. I don't care. Cage actually goes to Heathrow himself, and we see J Squad running, doing their calisthenics, and the Master Sergeant. Of course, I don't know who he is. And Cage makes his way to the firing range, and he sees Vertansky, and of course, she doesn't know him. And she's like, "What do you want?" And he starts laughing and smiling, and the film ends. And that's it for Edge of Tomorrow. So I really liked the film. I was so very impressed by the writing and direction for the first probably 5/6 of this film. They had one, twist. Cage had this one power, and they used it in multiple ways to drive the story forward. And I thought that it was very disciplined and very clever, and it was directed very like crackerjack. The director just getting out of the way of the story. Lyman was just like really, and it was really impressive too. Because Lyman's been around, right? And if he wants to kind of be a big showy director, he can, but he gets out of the way of this story and just shoots it very economically, and he lets the story and the writing really flow. And I don't think that needs to happen in every movie. I'm not a slave to, good writing. Movies are a visual medium, obviously, but I think it's smart in this case. I think it really works. And until they are on their way to Paris to battle the Omega, it's a crackerjack science fiction film, And the fact that it also has this little, subtext of, live, die, repeat, which has become, that was the tagline of the film, right? And that it really inhabits what it's like to play video games, I thought was really terrific. The third act was a real letdown. I didn't like Emily Blunt in the film at all. I didn't like, not a fan of how they use women in action films in certain ways, like Go All the Way. I didn't think she was very good. I didn't think there was any chemistry between the two of them. The whole third act in Paris, to me, was very boring, only because of the crackerjack and novel way that the rest of the film was structured. That third act was just kind of fell apart. And the ending was just, I didn't really get any satisfaction in the ending at all. It kind of, there was this kind of ending that was grabbing things it needed just in case it wanted to be a sequel. And I thought it was kind of, really, really a letdown in that way. But for a lot of it, really, really liked it. So, so there you have it. My analysis of Edge of Tomorrow. I want to thank everybody for listening. You can find us on iTunes and you can find us on any smartphone device that has like a podcast app. Just type in Sci-Fi on Screen and you can subscribe. We're also at scifionscreen.com. And there's a Facebook page, Sci-Fi on Screen, as well. And really, really much enjoy doing the show and looking forward to the next one. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thanks a lot.